About 3 weeks ago, Catherine and Bob approached my wife and I and invited us and our very dear mutual friends, David and Jeannie Gom, to come to her house for a spectacular evening party to celebrate life, to celebrate February, and to celebrate chocolate. She called it a chocolate kiss party. And the idea is that for one night, we were going to throw away taste, good health, calories, the food pyramid, and dine on nothing but chocolate. The richer, the more decadent, the better. And we were all supposed to bring something. This was going to be my contribution. I went to a gourmet soda shop, if I get this out, and I bought a number of bottles of Longer's Gourmet Dark Chocolate Premium Soda. And I was going to serve that around with a camera. I really wanted to see Bob's face when he tasted chocolate soda for the first time. I brought this with me today because I thought maybe I'd open it and propose a toast to Bob. But I made a mistake. I opened one of the bottles and tasted it. It was the nastiest stuff anybody ever invented. And I'm really convinced, I don't know how this company stays in business, but chocolate and carbonation are not a clever combination. So here's to you, Bob. You're welcome to it. This evening was kind of reminiscent of an evening we spent a couple of years ago. And again, you gotta know our wives. This is something Renee and Jeannie and Catherine concocted, but we decided to have a paint night. This time we met in our living room, in our house, and we dined on pink. We drank pink soda, which tastes a whole lot better. We ate pink food. We had salad that was largely pink. We had pink desserts. And then afterwards, we met in the basement and watched both of Steve Martin's Pink Panther movies, which is okay. The hard part was that our wives insisted that everybody wear pink. Now, for you liberated people of the 21st century, the new millennium, that's probably no big deal. But for people like Bob, born in Neanderthal times, and grown up like us in the 40s and 50s, the macho 40s and 50s, that was painful. You know, David looked tolerable. I looked stupid. But Catherine said Bob looked, quote, adorable, which is apparently her way of saying uncomfortably awkward. Because the pinkest thing about Bob were his cheeks. And even though it was just in the household of friends, I really think he was mortally embarrassed. He pulled me aside afterwards and said, when this night, I think he put it, this long night is over, I'm going to burn this shirt. Bob was a good sport, you have to give him that, and he never did burn the shirt, and I actually saw him wear it several times after, but never in public. Bob was my friend, and I loved him. I loved what a good-natured sport he was about everything. I knew he hated being called certain things, so when I just got the devil in me, I'd pick up the phone and say, "Hi, Bobby." I don't think he was called Bobby since he was 12, and I think he was very glad to get that out of his life. Or I would call him Howard. which is about the worst thing you could have done to Howard Robert Allen. But he was so good-natured. He was so friendly. He was so fun to talk to. I just all of a sudden feel it here. You know, there's so many things that you could like about him. He hated putting jigsaw puzzles together. He was wicked and vicious at Monopoly. Oh my gosh! You didn't play Monopoly with him. He was terrible at Scrabble, and he was very good at sequence. Now, we lost most of the games that he and I played of sequence because we always teamed up against our wives, and that meant I was on his team. And I cannot see through clever chess moves. I cannot see through clever strategies. But everybody else at the table can. And I was lost, and I fouled it up time and again for Bob. And he would just, Phil, I'm so glad I get to play with you because we always win. And then he'd joke about how we just humiliated our wives because we just slaughtered them. I was grateful for that. Bob was a people person first and last, and was never more happy than when he was talking to you. Bob made you feel like you were the center of his world when he was right there talking. And Bob was not only a great conversationalist, he was a great listener. He had a heart that was bigger than he was. He loved the outdoors. I suppose that came from growing up in California, where I'm told he raced his bicycle on the streets like a maniac. He once told me he knew the streets of his area of Sacramento like the back of his hand. And when he got older, he fell in love with the redwoods and the forests and the hills and the mountains of California. And long before we ever heard of words like environment, ecology, conservation, these words had become part of his very soul and his very being. Bob loved people. Bob loved nature. Bob loved the outdoors. And for you precious people here, Bob loved you with a special focus on his family. He loved his children. And I know, because he expressed it to me sometimes, that it was very hard for him to express that love. So I'm here today to tell his children and his grandchildren, and you, Catherine, how much he had told me in the past personally. He loved you and cared about you, even though sometimes he said he fouled things up. There's no doubt in my mind Bob was not perfect. But unlike so many of us, he was working to become that way. And I don't know what it is about fire in Bob. He loves setting things on fire, which I thought was interesting because he, at one point in his life, was a professional firefighter. And he spent hours telling us, regaling us is a better word, about firefighting and the dangers and what it was like. And then the next thing you know, he was lighting a fire. But also, it reminds me of something. Years ago, Renee, my wife, and I got up very early to drive our son to meet a friend. They were going out of state together to go to a car show, and they wanted an early start. So we got the car loaded and ready for him to go, and we drove him downtown to meet his friend. It was about 5:30, 5:40 in the morning. It was a cold, frosty day, and there was nobody on the streets. And when we turned to go south from 800 North onto University Avenue, we could see clear down there. And I remember thinking as we drove along University that there must have been some kind of major car accident down by Center Street, because there were so many blue and red patrol lights flashing. But as we got closer, we also noticed that not only were there a lot of police cars and the road was blocked, but there were also a lot of fire trucks. And to our horror, we noticed that the Provo Tabernacle was on fire. Now, Bob and Catherine had responsibility to some degree or other for the tabernacle, and they loved that building. So we got our son situated, and then we called them, and they came to watch that treasure, that jewel, that physical heart of Provo burn. And with a fireman's eye, Bob would point out this, and he'd point out that, and he'd say why the firemen are doing that, which actually might seem counterintuitive to us laymen, and why they were doing this. And at one point I asked him, was there any hope for the building? And he said, no, I think it's gone. And he was right. The building burned the rest of the day. I later went and talked to Bob about it. Like everybody else in Provo, he was heartbroken. But then the old tabernacle just sat for months. And we all, like you, speculated about what was going to happen. And Bob said one thing, and I said one thing, and our wife said another thing. We just talked about it. And then came that day in General Conference, most of you remember, when we learned that the old building was going to be rebuilt. But it was also not only going to be rebuilt, it was going to be reborn. And Bob and Catherine and I and Renee sat and we watched the groundbreaking. And we thought, how marvelous that this old tabernacle, which had served the community and served the people in Provo, was now going to serve God. And it's been under construction for over a year, and it'll be over a year before it's done. And it breaks my heart Bob isn't going to be there to see it. But the interesting thing about that tabernacle, come temple, is now I can look back and see how much it reminds me of Bob. Bob was tabernacled in 1938. And Bob served the Boy Scouts. Bob served the forests of California. Bob served his community. And without going into a whole lot of detail, like the tabernacle, there was a time he crashed and burned. But like the tabernacle, God stepped in and took a hand. C.S. Lewis once said that when we allow God into our lives, He enters the hovel, the shack, the hut that we have made of our lives, and He starts rebuilding. And we expect that when it's all over, we'll be a nice little cottage with a neat prim garden, a nice shade tree in front, and a picket white fence around it. But that's not God's plan. He takes out His saws and He takes out His hammers and He makes a fearful din, because God intends to turn each one of us into a magnificent palace, into a temple where He can dwell in spirit. And Bob, like all of us, has gone through a fearful racket of banging and clanging on the inside, as God is turning him into a temple where the Spirit of the Lord can dwell pure where pure love of Christ can dwell. Bob isn't completed, but the master builder has simply switched him from one workbench to another, where Bob can finish the work that Christ began. And I really am looking forward to the time when Bob, like the rest of us, can be the purest temple of God's love. And when we look in Bob's eyes, we will see Bob, but we will also see Christ. We will see our departed friend from last Monday, and we will see Father. And we will see love, pure and unfeigned. That's where Bob is right now. And God isn't finished. And as soon as I say that's where Bob is right now, I doubt it very much, in the sense, I really hope he's here. I hope he's got his arms around each one of you at different times. And he's whispering into your heart, I love you, I miss you, but this is all right. This is good. We are all in the hands of God. Bob, I love you. And I miss you. And you haven't been gone a week. I'm going to miss his cooking. He made great spaghetti. He made really good chicken out of French dressing. That was good. I'm going to miss our reading parties. Catherine and Bob would invite us over to their house to read a good book and have some quiet refreshments. And we would sit out in the yard, we'd sit in the living room, we'd sit in the cabin. And when we were at the cabin, our reading parties usually meant the ladies read or talked, and Bob and I and David fell asleep somewhere. I'm going to miss shaking hands. Clutching Bob's hand was like grabbing a catcher's mitt. I'm going to miss his big cuddly hugs. I'm going to miss the twinkle in his eye when he said, you take care now, dear. I'm going to miss my friend. But the joy is, I know, and you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, that friends and loved ones are never truly parted. In this life, when we're gone, our memories burn in our hearts. And we remember the good times, and with God's blessing, we forget the bad things. And then, when it's our turn, which is coming all too soon, and all too surprising, and all too quick, we can throw our arms around each other again, never to be parted again, and to share the new experiences that we are looking forward to having, hand in hand with God, hand in hand with our loved ones, hand in hand with our friends forever. God bless you, Bob. God bless his wonderful family. And God bless us all. We have a bottle of chocolate soda. First come, first served. And I say these in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.